Welcome to the Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva, and today we're going to get some insight into internship programs for the specialized need. My guest today is Dan McManmon, and he is the president of the college internship program. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
So usually I start my guests where they went to college. So where'd you go to school?
So I went to Champlain College up in Burlington, Vermont, and I had studied there for 4 years toward my bachelor's in marketing and graphic design.
Wow, fantastic. So let's go back a little bit in time. Let's go into high school. When did you start thinking about going to college? Was it freshman year of high school, senior year? When did it all begin for you?
Sure. I think I'm one of five in my family, so I'm 4 of 5. And by that time, my parents kind of, they wouldn't have as much of a sharp focus on that. So I probably had a later start than typical. I had pretty specific interests too in high school, so I knew generally what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly where I wanted to land, but my trajectory was pretty focused within high school, and it centered around computers, multimedia, art, and socially I was skateboarding and snowboarding, and I was pretty much basically captured my life in high school at that point. So I ended up in Vermont, which makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, so now you go there, and what's the school like?
It was interesting. So I remember going up for my orientation, and I skipped a lot of the orientation. I was sort of dropped off up in my my dorm, and I realized in retrospect, it was a big leap for me just to be prepared for college. But I quickly sunk in, and because it's a smaller school and pretty tight-knit community, made friends pretty quickly. The dorm rooms were smaller. We had 4 of us in the room together. And I was familiar with Burlington, Vermont, because my sister had gone to UVM and she lived locally in the area too. So I knew my way around, and I, kind of caught my stride. Within about a month, I felt pretty comfortable, but the first month was rocky for me, for sure.
Great. So now you graduate there. How do you go from there to becoming the president of college internship program?
Sure. So my father had started CIP. We'll keep it CIP. It's easier for everybody. He had started it 35 years ago, and he's a psychologist. And I grew up in and around our organization at the time. I've done a lot, and we have a special needs population. So very familiar with it, but in my mind, having gone to school and having, kind of that laser focus, I saw myself doing something more independently in multimedia graphic design area. But getting into my junior year of college up in Vermont in the summertime, I had this knee injury. I had a bad knee for a while, and I just kind of worked through it. But I had probably pulled a hamstring, and at the same time had contributed toward, basically a little bit of bone breakage just from finding out after the fact that it was like a loss of blood flow long-term issue in my knee. So it brought me home for surgeries over 3 years from that point in the summer. And at that time, I started to get involved more with my father's work, really just in the multimedia graphic design side. But literally, once I got back up on my feet, I started to do some of the residential work with the students. And for me, just in where I was at the time, and it was depressing having that happen toward your tail end of college, and I didn't have a great plan as to where I was going to go after, but it sort of brought me closer to home to do this work that had already been happening all around me. I just never engaged at a deep enough level with it. And once I did, I really found a lot of value for myself in working with the population, and just got further and further involved. I moved out to Berkeley, California. We have a location out there as well that we started. So I took the opportunity to move out there and help get that off the ground, and just took on a series of positions. And at a certain point, I saw clearly, and had the opportunity to take a bigger and bigger role. And then eventually the president role came up, and my dad, who had put a lot of faith in me and had given me this opportunity. I probably wouldn't have hired myself at the time, but he saw that and he put me in the position, and it's been the best thing because I was able to convert over from a place of being an employee and understanding the value of the employer or the employee to student relationship, and then coming into understanding what employers needed as well from the organization, and having an opportunity after, close to 10 years to step into that role and contribute even more into the organization.
Now, do you have, you said you're one of 5. Do you have siblings that work there as well?
They've dabbled, yeah. My sister had worked in admissions. She set the record for the most new students one fall term, and then she dropped the mic and took off after that. But she moved on into culinary arts, which was her passion. My oldest sister is an interior designer, so she's helped us with some projects when we needed to furnish centers and things like that. But the others have gone off each in their own way. One's a dietitian up in Vermont. One has a charcuterie business where they make local meat products out in Maine, and the other one's still in the food world here in the Berkshires. She has a creperie cafe.
Wow, fantastic! So you said you were in Berkeley, California. So how many different sites do you have?
Sure. So CIP started here in Lee in the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts in '84, and in the early 2000s we had opened in Florida, Melbourne, Florida specifically, and from that point we opened a few sites back to back. Just a couple or 3 years in between. So Massachusetts down to Melbourne, Florida, then out to Bloomington, Indiana, which is home to IU. And then out to Berkeley, California, and we're in Long Beach, California as well.
Wow. So let's get into the college internship program, CIP. What is it? How does it work? And what do you do?
Sure. So for students who have a diagnosis of autism or a related learning difference, so neurologically wired a little differently, have a different set of needs, who tend to socially isolate, need more academic support, more social skills related supports, or time management organization, typically have a hard time from that adolescence to adulthood stage, and that's what you tend to focus on here is, that launch into college, finding yourself, your identity, your career path. So our students had a hard enough time typically navigating through high school. Their parents have been a big dependent to them. So what often happens is they try to go off to college because academically they may be very capable and they have failures there, or they don't even pursue it because they know they just need more. So what CIP is it's a year-round residential program. It's a supported apartment living structure where students live with each other in apartments, and they're, cooking, cleaning, taking care of their responsibilities from that standpoint. They can attend a local college with our support, and they participate in pre-employment and workplace experiences, so usually volunteering, internships, up to paid jobs. And CIP has physical centers where we provide a range of these services under one roof, and those students can receive a range of individualized and group services based on their needs to help them be successful in that transition from adolescence to adulthood.
So it's not an actual college that you're running, right?
Nope.
Are you associated with colleges? Do you work out some kind of program with the colleges?
We don't have official connections from that standpoint. We have great partnerships and relationships, but it's similar to a dual enrollment type of environment. So they would primarily come to study at CIP to learn the foundational skills they need to have that level of experience. And many of them would then take 1 to 2 classes to begin with at a local college. And typically our students are pursuing an associate's degree or an area of certification, just because some students go further and some transition from CIP and they might finish and get their bachelor's. Is really individually based on their set of needs and their goals. But it is set up distinctively separate from the college or the university locally. We tend to have 2 to 4 local colleges or universities that students can choose from. And we also are an approved institution to accept international students to study at CIP. So that's kind of a whole other interesting take where non-resident international students can come through to study at CIP and then concurrently study at a local college as well.
So give me an example. You're in Massachusetts. What are some of the colleges that associate themselves or you work with to get these students into those types of colleges?
Sure. So here in Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, we've worked with Berkshire Community College extensively for a very long time. The Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts is also, they have a annex office close enough to us now in Pittsfield that our students can attend. And we used to have some students who also went through a vocational school called Mildred Alley. The Berkshires area, it tends to be a little more vocationally oriented to students, and we have an in-house vocational path. So students are on one path or the other typically. So Berkshire Community College students might go, and most commonly they're studying anything from hospitality, management, because that tends to be bigger in this region. Early childhood is a very popular degree path or certification path. And then sometimes, things like, anything in the computer information system side of the house. It varies. It's really dependent on students' needs, and we can even help students study online as well because of the varying social and structural needs that they benefit from. Some are pursuing from an online college standpoint a little easier, and that allows them to focus more time vocationally in person with the hands-on, type of experiences to connect it all together.
Now, the CIP, do they do classes themselves as well?
Yep. Yeah. So a student could come through to CIP and have about 20 to 30 hours of support with us, and of those a week. And of those, there may be 5 to 8 hours of structured group modules, like social thinking, for instance, or Bookends EF class, which EF stands for executive functioning. So it might be a Monday, Friday. Let's look at the week ahead, plan through all of our assignments, break it down into chunks, and schedule in how we're going to get this work done and when we're going to schedule it in, what supports we'll need, So we're helping scaffold around the college experience and around even the social aspect too, because our housing is somewhat reminiscent of like a dorm-like living experience where your new relationships, people are dating, you have all of that under one roof in one environment where we're helping manage and, help people have adult types of experiences and help. We're a big safety net, but also something was, a productive environment to push people forward and to engage and to find their identity and achieve things.
So now the internship part, what types of companies do you work with where they get internships?
Sure. So it's pretty individualized. Really, we're looking at a pretty local situation for us in and around all of our centers. So we have some partnerships with certain types of businesses. Here, Jacob's Pillow is a big international arts festival that we have a very solid relationship with there, or the Red Lion Inn, so our students have opportunities. Norman Rockwell Museum is another in the Berkshires. If you go down to Florida, for instance, the Melbourne Public Library is a great option. The Brevard Zoo is a great one for a lot of students. So we tend to have a handful of really strong settings that are most common. Our students want to pursue or can find some of their interests there. And then additionally, on top of that, we're helping students to source out any internship otherwise within the local vicinity around their interests and their career and academic paths. And we look at it as a career continuum. So, the volunteering aspect is really important. It allows you to get your foot in the door and see a business in a more casual setting with a peer group. Internships, we have a goal of all of our students each year having internships, and some have multiple. And, leading to paid internships and jobs is the goal. But really, our students are with us for the foundational supports and bringing that all together in a manageable way. And, it can vary as far as where they end up going in terms of their trajectory. I mean, sometimes our types of students have a thought that they want to do something very specific, but as they get more involved in it, or they backwards plan from it, they understand either the requirements to get into that field might be very, very lofty for them, or the purpose of them getting involved actually wasn't the driving force behind them, and they could actually achieve it through a different path. So a lot of what we do is just helping people experience these types of settings and plan and drive, but it's a very iterative process. The ups and downs are much like most people's experiences, where the real value in the learning happens.
So now, do most students that come to CIP, do they graduate? And what's the amount of time with going to college, going to your school, and doing a voluntary or an internship? What's the amount of time that they're going?
Yeah, so it's a minimum of 1 year, and the way that the program works over time, it can actually scale down and fade out more so. So we have the opportunity for lesser supports as time goes on to make more of a natural transition. But what's typical is a student comes in, they might stay with us for 2 to 3 years is the average length of stay. About half of our students, or probably 60% of our students, go on an academic path. So they start to concurrently study through the local college. Most commonly, they take, a credit, 1 or 2 credits to begin with, just to sort of make time for this transition, because the primary focus is not academics. Mm-hmm. But as they ramp up, we run mostly around the whole year's time. So our students tend to take summer term classes as well. So they make progress toward, most commonly an associate's or a certification type of degree. We've had students who've come in after the fact, having failed, and can pick up and move further faster. But as they get toward that tail end, they're considering, from reaching various milestones, what does next steps start to look like. And a lot of them have come uncertain as to what their possibilities might be. So they're considering, things like, like the rest of us do. When we go to college, you start to make friends, and you start to really develop your interests and find those opportunities. So it's very uniquely individualized for students, where some might go back toward home. That's common, where they want to be near their families, and their families like to have that, but they start to work, put their skills to work, maybe rent an apartment and live semi-independently in that type of setting, whereas others might transition. Some in-state schools are a good option, where they can then build off of their credits toward a bachelor's degree. So we've had students be successful from that standpoint. Others, just continue down that path academically and vocationally. But, it's really the psychological underlying side of CIP is what's most important. Is if you think about, the easiest analogy is, say you move to France and you're just not familiar with the culture or the language, and you have to navigate that. Our students learn differently, and they have to be explicitly taught, just like you would if you were not familiar with that culture. So we're doing that explicit teaching in real life settings, and getting them to, essentially take ownership and drive that process toward a path that they need to determine, because that's the process of transition. Is you kind of we call it the steel umbilical cord from your family members who have done everything for you, and you have to be self-determined to make choices. So we want to equip them with the tools to do that, and we want to help them understand how to make good choices, how to rely on people and utilize people for advice. All of these tools, essentially, that are explicitly taught. One is the donkey rule, right? So if you have 5 people the rule goes like this: if 5 people call it a horse and you think it's a donkey, then stop being a jackass and call it a horse. But the reality is like, when you break it down, if you have 5 people you know and trust their advice, but you in your head might have this very specific thought that, no, it's different, it doesn't apply to me. The rule is in social thinking and cognitive flexibility is,
Sure.
Take on the advice of those people and accept it as a rule and try that, because those 5 people you know and trust are probably correct.
Yeah.
And these are the types of explicit tools and, life-changing things that can be taught to someone to navigate these circumstances that they're not always naturally as equipped to navigate.
So now, is there a tuition that you have? Is there some help that you give to families? Is there a financial aid package? How does this all work?
Yeah. So historically, we've always been private pay. The tuition is definitely up there in terms of comparable options. The reality is, because we provide such a comprehensive year-round specialized educational program, the tuition is comparable to a very high-end private college. So it's anywhere from 60 to 70 in tuition a year, and living expenses or attending a local college and paying for those credits would be separate from that. So on the higher end, for sure, in terms of what's available, we've had some tuition assistance. We tend to give tuition assistance out to families who are staying with us to extend their time to make sure that they're going to be productive in that setting. We have school district funding that does come through for some families, so that can be a big help. And then in certain states like California, they have, I will say, better funding sources available for families that do cover the cost of tuition for a program like CIP.
Okay. Now, how many students usually attend, and how many faculty compared to students? What's the ratio that you have?
Yeah, so we have about a 2-to-1 student to staff ratio, full-time equivalent overall. About 175 students this current year, so coming out of 2019 and 20, 175 students between the 5 CIP locations. So we tend to have about 50 to 60 new students come in over the course of the year, and we have anywhere from I think last year was closer to 115 returning students.
Wow.
Yep.
Fantastic. Now, how about living quarters? When a student comes there, what do they expect? What kind of living quarters do they have? What are the classrooms like? How does it all work for them?
Sure. So the apartments are really important. So they're set up like any other apartment. Not most colleges, of course, you're living in, you might have a meal pass and you have certain amenities provided so that you're studying and, you're not focusing on those areas. But for our students, they're doing their laundry. We're helping with menu planning, cooking, cleaning, roommate meetings, the whole deal. So they have access to their own bedrooms. They're furnished. But they're basically maintaining that household and working together as a team to do that with staff that coach them within their apartment settings. They have on-call 24/7 service, but there's no live-in staff. So they have a lot of, we like to say they live semi-independently. You have to be able to live semi-independently, meaning you couldn't have higher levels of needs that wouldn't keep you safe in that type of environment. But mainly our students are there to learn those foundational skills, because you can't hold a job if you can't get there on time, and you can't iron your clothes, and you haven't eaten a good breakfast, and all those aspects are really why people would choose to send their student to CIP, or their student would choose to come. And then our offices are classrooms, a lot of individual offices. We have a lot of individual appointments. We have a fleet of vans for van transportation. Each area is a little different. So we're in Berkeley, Bloomington, and Long Beach, California. We're in slightly more urban settings. So the housing would be within an apartment complex with other members of the community. Whereas in Florida and Massachusetts, the housing most of it is in individual houses, so shared houses, and then you have neighbors in an actual neighborhood and that type of setting. So
how do students find you? Do they just go to your website, or do they call? What happens?
It's probably similar to most educational institutions, but because of our students often have some kind of clinical categorization or a medication that they've been diagnosed with, and they tend to have received some special ed services. We would see more referrals from clinicians, so a psychologist, for instance, or a therapist who is familiar with the needs of the student and what we do. But we still have many families who find us online, educational consultants, who help families who are looking for that very specific good fit. So a little bit more on that clinical medical side, just because there's more pronounced need, but lots of word of mouth. Most of our families are coming either from word of mouth or professional referrals.
Wow. So we're coming to the end of our show, and usually I ask my guests, what advice do you want to give to the parents and the students that are watching this show? What advice do you want to give them?
Sure, I'll give advice from my experience, which is, when you're looking out into the next step in pursuing college, for me, what was really important was to get hands-on and to understand not just what I thought college would be like and what I thought I wanted to study, but to actually get in the field and to experience it. So volunteering is one of the best things that I recommend for most families. Is if you have an interest in something, just volunteer and get right in there, because you get to really experience it, and you can't really think your way through high school into college. And I think that's what a lot of people try to do. So that's the biggest piece of advice. Plus, just socially and emotionally, look out for that side of things too. If you're prepared, make sure you have the supports you need personally to ensure that your anxiety or anything else that might come around in that environment that would cause you to not move forward or hold you back in any way is addressed, because I see that being such a huge need right now in the state of higher ed. It's just that anxiety and depression, mental health connection.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Dan. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yep. So you've been watching The Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva. Until next time.